Hey everyone, this is Tracy Friedlander. You're listening to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. On the show today, I have James Dargan, a multifaceted artist as a baritone, violinist, composer, poet, and activist. I was introduced to him by a friend, and when I looked him up on Facebook, which is always the first place I check, I saw some of his posts, and wow, he is not afraid to say what he thinks. As you all know, a fundamental part of audience building is posting to social media, and this is what I teach now. And so I know from experience and also from my clients that this is the scariest part of starting to grow an audience. And clearly James is not afraid of posting his opinion. And he posts about his views on the racism and inequality that exists in the classical music and opera world. So these are bold conversations he's starting. And so I needed to find out more. So I reached out to James and I asked him to have a conversation, and we had the most extraordinary conversation before the podcast. Of course, I asked him to be on because I really wanted to dive deeper in what he does both as an artist and what he says online, and how that what that does for his career, because I really wanted to know, was it hard to start doing that at first? What was that like? And what he told me is that it's extraordinary what happened when he started being himself and saying what he thought online. And this is what he wants everyone to know about, and it's what we talk about today in this conversation. We also started the conversation talking about online performances, because as a performer, James, like you and every other musician, is faced with, this is what people are doing now. And if you take a performance online, how do you make it stand out? How do you do it online? So this is the conversation starting point today. And I'm so excited for you to hear this. Also, James has a recital tomorrow on Zoom, Saturday, May 16th. And so if you're listening to this and it's not May 16th yet, or it is May 16th before 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or Eastern Daylight Time, sorry, you can catch this concert. So the link to sign up and get that Zoom link, the concert is free. The link will be in the show notes. Also, the doors are opening to the second round of Audience Building Basics on July 1st. Audience Building Basics is my signature program teaching you how to grow your audience now so you can create new income streams. If that sounds like something you want to do, then this program is for you. Email me at crushingclassical@gmail.com for more information. Also, if you sign up for my email list now, you can get my free PDF, Keys to Audience Building, and 90 plus ideas for social media posts for classical musicians. That link is in the show notes. Let's get started. So awesome. Mm-hmm. So, oh my God, I'm so excited, James. Welcome to Crushing Classical, James Dargan.
Oh, thank you. I feel very welcome.
We've just been chatting for 20 minutes about all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, oh no, all the goodies are missing.
No, we got plenty of goodies. We're a goodie shop.
Yeah. I mean, you're like mic drop moment guy right now, like all the time. We had a conversation. Was it like 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, like every 2 seconds, because I just love what you do. I love your stand on like the state of things in opera and like classical music in general. We agree on like so much stuff. So we're going to break down a bunch of stuff. And actually, you know what, right before I hit record, when we were talking about what makes a good online concert, we have to dive into that, because I think a lot of people, I'm wondering that. I mean, honestly, what in this time, we're looking at, if people want to perform, it's got to be streamed.
Right.
And what makes it good versus what makes it boring. Probably a lot of things are similar to a live performance too, but there's got to be some extra elements. And so we're definitely diving into that today.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny because, I've been doing a lot of, like audience member listener research, and I've gotten the chance to go to so many more of my friends' concerts than I usually am able to, because I'm in one place for once.
Hmm.
And they are also in one place, the internet. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because my one caveat from my thoughts here is that my official online concert debut is Saturday evening, but all of these concerts that I've been attending, and of course I had my tech rehearsal slash dress rehearsal on Wednesday, so I have a little I have the experience of at least having done parts of my program and working out the kinks with a live audience on the other side of the internet.
Oh,
And what
okay. So
I'm
you're getting ready to do this right now.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
there's an organization in Boston called Dunamis, which is amazing, and they're doing something called Seeds of Joy, which is basically a concert workshop series all over Zoom. So my slot is coming up on Saturday evening, and it's been really fun working within the particular constraints of the medium because it's kind of a necessity is the mother of invention kind of deal.
Right.
But there was just the sheer like nerdy joy of realizing that you know the instruments that I had to work with were violin and voice, and I was playing both of them, and it was live, so I had to figure out a way to arrange some things that I'd already written for violin and voice instead of violin and piano, to make new arrangements of other things, to kind of understand how textures work differently than if two people are playing versus if I'm playing both instruments, things like that. That was all like fine music theory, composing, like nerdy, dorky musician stuff. Like that was great. But I noticed and learned so much about pacing and kind of the more ephemeral parts of what we do from watching this friend of mine, Christopher Preston Thompson, do his performance for the early music series, Gotham Early Music series. And what was so great about that particular was like an hour 15, and it was all medieval stuff. Like it was all troubadour and chant. Like it was just straight down the middle. But Christopher made it clear that he thought of these pieces as vital and alive by connecting them to current cultural and political contexts. So you have stuff
Interesting.
from like the 14 and 1500s referred to the political climate of today. And he could only do that because he is so steeped academically and like from real world experience in the repertoire. He's studied it and he's like working on his DMA in it. He's written you know, tons of scholarly stuff about it. And he's just been performing it for years. So like it's as easy to him as, the Sondheim catalog would be ready for a musical theater person. Or, Schubert would be easy to pick for me, right? Or spirituals, right? Like it's his jam.
It's part of
So
him. Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
that
it's
makes
just part of
sense.
him.
Yeah.
It's organic for him. So when he got up there, obviously I knew because I'd been communicating with him before the program. I knew that he'd been, rehearsing meticulously, but you can't fake that level of familiarity, and you can't like cram that level of familiarity. Like that just comes from him having lived with the repertoire. And so we got up there and absolutely held, I would say the stage, but held his living room and held us all wrapped because he knew exactly what each song was about and therefore could relate it to a real life or a current thing, could relate it to a universal theme, and could give you kind of the elevated pitch for what a song was about in a clear, concise, and spontaneous way. And so it felt like you were just in his living room with him.
It's so amazing. It sounds a little more deep than just explaining or reading kind of a show note, kind of a
Oh yeah.
like playbill type thing. It sounds like
Oh
a
yeah.
lot deeper than that.
Oh yeah. I mean, and he had like sheets of paper on a music stand with like the lyrics for certain songs, but he was not reading off of program notes. Like it was clearly
He knows it.
it was just in his heart, you know.
Yeah.
And so that was one big reason why we came along with him. And what I realized from that show versus a lot of other shows that I've watched recently that seemed to have more lacunae or gaps or kind of drops in intensity was that because the the viewfinder is so strict, right? Like your view of the concert never changes, and you get by necessity, a closer view of the person's face and body than you would even in the front row of a concert hall. Any drop or any kind of flicker on and off of the light, that is concentration, that is intensity on the part of the performer, you notice it even more because, you know, we talk about, and rightly so, you know, we should tell each other as musicians and, you know, students as well, that, you know, it's not about not ever making mistakes, because usually we say, because people can't tell that from the stage. But if you are focused so much on whether you're doing it perfectly in a live online show, then first of all, you'll never do it perfectly. So, you know, you're going to make a mistake somewhere. If you register that, if you let that throw you off, it's even more apparent online because people are looking straight at you.
Yes.
There's
Yeah.
there's nothing else to be distracted by.
It's a little bit like a Facebook Live. You know, like what
Mm-hmm.
makes a good Facebook Live? Because you're looking at a camera, you can't
Mm-hmm.
see the people over there.
Yes.
And like what I've discovered is if you can put your brain in neutral, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
and just like allow yourself to get into that forced, not forced, like forced
Mm-hmm.
state, that
Yeah.
flow state, that like
Yes.
you're almost like making yourself get into the
Mm-hmm.
flow state because you're saying, okay, like I am not going to analyze anything that's coming out of my mouth right now. Because if
Yes.
I start immediately thinking about what I'm saying, then I'll
Mm.
start like there's this kind of like background second guessing thing that happens.
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. It's
You
well,
know?
I mean, it's our critic. It's our inner critic,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah, and it happens in real time. So if you can't, you have to consciously sort of turn it off and then just let yourself be yourself. So I think
yes.
that's probably a little bit of that essence that you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely. And that is the kind of thing where that mindset of flow, of kind of giving yourself over to being in the moment,
Yeah.
regardless, like the kind of mindset where even if your fly might be open, you wouldn't remember to check, right?
Right.
Like there is that is actually the mindset that I have found on the road brings people into feeling like the live concert experience is intimate.
Okay. This is
Because
great. This is great.
yeah, it kind of, what I'm noticing is that it's both a different medium and that there are a lot of flows back and forth between these contexts. So like I don't find myself um slipping into like a recording booth mentality just because I'm online or on camera, because you
Hmm.
can't. You are still performing. So there is a lot of kind of exchange between your live in-person persona or person and your live over the internet persona. And if you are able to go into that flow state in a live in-person performance, it means that there is no break or switch between the music and what you say about it in between, so that people don't think, oh, they are now done performing and they will give me the little mini lecture part of the program and then
Hmm.
back to the music.
Okay, that's so interesting. And so at this point, like I want to do two things. I want to give
Mm-hmm.
everyone like a little more like context of what you do
Right.
from with your in your own words.
Mm-hmm.
Because of course I'll do an intro on this later,
Yeah.
but like when I found out about who you are and what you do like in your life, like in your life outside of singing on stage and how that's
Mm-hmm.
totally integrated into like who you are as a person, as an artist, all right down to the music that you choose. And so it's even more than just like the lecture part versus the music. Like all
Yeah.
of, for you, it's all of it is the same thing.
Yeah.
And then it all goes offline or
Mm-hmm.
off stage and
Yeah.
online too, where
Yeah.
you're making big statements about like the state of things in the orchestra world and the
Mm-hmm.
classical music world. And you, I mean, you lay it out there. You like, you're an activist essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of weird because I didn't know that there was any other way to do it
Okay.
until I came out of the bubble that I grew up in North Carolina and like started interfacing with like the way the real world of classical music usually works, like with conservatories and studio classes and all
Right,
that
right.
stuff. It it didn't cross my mind because I grew up. My father is or was a jazz musician, music theory professor, ethnomusicologist, the head of the music program at St. Augustine's College in Raleigh, North Carolina. And you and I talked obviously about the new North Carolina connection, but I grew up in
Yeah,
Durham,
yeah.
and my father, he sang, played like 8 instruments, composed, directed choirs, like the whole like black church music director thing. And
Hmm.
he was also an ordained minister. So like it was just kind of a constant flow back and forth. And I think flow is probably going to be a word that we use a lot. A constant flow back and forth between words, music,
Yeah.
theory, performance. It was all kind of in the same place. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
because
it was
that's how
all,
it is in a church, right? I mean, like
yeah,
the
that's how it is in the black
speaking
church.
in the music, it's
Yeah.
all connected.
Yeah, and that is actually one of those things where if you grow up in that pool, where like there is flow state between all of these supposedly disparate forms of artistic expression, and again, and also my mom is English teacher, anthropologist, folklorist, plays the flute and sings beautifully. So like there's there was zero dividing line in our house
Hmm.
between the stories that they would read to me to get me to go to sleep when I was a kid and the music they would put on the record player to get me to go to sleep when I was a kid. Like there was no, you know what I mean? Like the music and words just kind of inhabited the same space.
Okay.
And if music and words inhabit the same space, then being able to say with absolute clarity, this is what I know, this is who I am, and this is what I believe comes as a matter of course because people are open to the idea that you would say what you believe in, like because speaking is like supposedly our first, well, language way of communicating,
Yeah.
but oftentimes they'll accept you singing or playing something you don't believe in because music is supposed to have this like little removed quality, you know what I mean? And so it gives you an
Yeah.
excuse to be able to be like, well, I don't actually like Meyerbeer, but I'm being paid to sing or play Meyerbeer, so I will play or sing Meyerbeer. And because people know that I probably don't actually love it, I don't have to even act like I love it. So I can just do it.
Mm.
And that's enough because I'm not being paid to love Meyerbeer. I'm being paid to sing it. And no offense to Meyerbeer, I love a lot of his songs, but you know that's just like a random composer that I pulled out of the I don't want the Meyerbeer camp to come after me on the social medias, but if there
I
is
don't think
one,
there is a Meyer beer
shout
can.
out to the hashtag Meyerbeer crowd. But like, you know what I mean? Like there, I didn't grow up thinking that there was any excuse to be less authentic in music or dance or writing than in speech because all of the art forms were not only in my life but were also represented by people like adult friends of my parents that I grew up around. So like Louise Toppin, a fantastic operatic soprano, she's one of the only black people to win the Metropolitan Opera auditions. um she was like right down the road. I think she was teaching at a college in like East Carolina.
Hmm.
Then Bill Banfield was around. He's a composer, jazz musician, polymath. Then T.J. Anderson, who was one of my father's doctoral advisors, also a great composer. One of the, I think he won, he was the first black composer, American composer to win a Pulitzer for a while. Um, or, well, the only one for a while. He was down the street. His wife Lois was the editor in chief at a publishing company that was devoted to children's books based on black historical figures. So, like, there were John Hope Franklin was 15 minutes away from us, and John Hope used to be on the advisory board for Bill Clinton when he was in office. He wrote a textbook called From Slavery to Freedom, which was like the seminal textbook on like early America for a good while. He lived in Chapel Hill, which, as you know, is not at all far. There were just amazing, and these people were all black. C. Eric Lincoln, who taught at Fisk for a long time, poet, historian, musician. There were all of these black people around us who were incredibly skilled in a lot of so-called Western classical canon type disciplines, but were also like still remembered what it was like to be country, still liked good food, still liked black church. Like they were still culturally black as well. So, you know, Louise started a company called Videmus, which is dedicated to lifting up works by black classical composers. And so she's a classically trained soprano who makes a good living as a professor. I think she's a professor now at Michigan State, as like the traditional like singing and teaching and being a professor kind of thing. But then also she programs music by Margaret Bonds or Florence Price or William Grant Still on all of her recitals. And she has a whole publishing company and record company devoted to the repertoire. They have a vocal competition every year for high school seniors and for college students dedicated to black composers. So like Louise is not leaving herself and her convictions behind to to free her voice in the way that she can.
Right.
To sing in the style that feels natural to her. She is herself doing this thing. And I grew up having all of those examples like right next door, like down the street from us. And so I didn't know that you were supposed to like leave yourself behind.
Okay.
I didn't know
That's
that you were
amazing.
supposed to pretend.
So did you never feel self-conscious about making, like once you got into the professional opera world, did you start to notice, okay, like maybe it's not so common or accepted to make really strong statements? Like I remember what the day, I think one of the days before, or maybe the day of our call that we had, and you had posted something on Facebook about like these live stream concerts are just really spotlighting the lack of diversity, and you're not hiding, like you're not like, and you were just very, very blunt in that post. And like, I work with people trying to find their voice and start building an audience online. This is something that seems really natural to you. And so I'm just wondering, like, because a lot of people would be like, oh my God, that's so scary to post. What if people, like, what if the institutions get mad at me, or what if this, or what, you know what I mean? Like, I think people have a lot of fears around that. I know, and it sounds silly to say that out loud, but like in the moment you're pressing publish,
oh, of course.
Did that ever cross your mind, like maybe at the beginning of doing that?
Absolutely, because all of the you know, I ended up in Boston again after, you know, years doing other things to start the singing career, and immediately I noticed that both implicitly and explicitly, all of the people involved in the opera machine were going to make you think twice or feel self-conscious about being clearly non-old, rich, and white. Right. Like they would, my favorite kind of implicit one, and they thought this was, you know, being subtle. My favorite one was always some variation of, wow, it's really surprising how natural that style is to you. Or it's really amazing how comfortable you are with it, and it still feels so soulful and sounds so soulful. Talking, you know, about like my first two opera roles when I got to Boston were The Sacristan in Tosca and the covering Figaro in Mozart's Figaro.
Okay.
And so I'm like, okay, I hear that you think that you're paying me a compliment by telling me. And at this point, I was like, you know, they'd cast me partially because of my resume, because, you know, what you show them at auditions, right? So it's not like I was some person that just fell off the pumpkin truck on the way to the rehearsal and just rolled in, and they were like, you sing, you know, Figaro, okay, or cover Figaro. You know, and it was a production with cover runs as well, so I know I was going to be like performing it. So I wasn't coming in blind, and they weren't coming in blind as per me, right? And so they saw, you know, this guy's like 20, you know, 24, 25, has been playing violin since he was 2.5, has like gone to all of these, you know, upper level like ensemble festivals like Music Order and Greenwood, and like done this and that and that. He knows how to spell Mozart, right? Like he knows the stuff, right? And so how is it a compliment to say with a tone and face of abject surprise, and shock, you sound like you really understand this. You sound like it's natural for you. It sounds really, you sound really comfortable with the musical idiom. It's Mozart. I mean, how are you not going to be comfortable with the musical idiom? I mean, it's not Penderecki. Like what
Yeah,
like I
there
just,
isn't. It was like a backhanded
it was
compliment.
it was so weird. And like,
Yeah.
it was one of those things where I started to think, of course I started to think, am I doing it wrong? And
Mm.
that was back then was when I started um developing the habit that I still hold and tell everybody that I ever work with in masterclass or lesson form. That's when I started recording everything I did. I started recording lessons, I started recording rehearsals, coachings, precisely because the way that they would react in real time would always make me feel the singer's equivalent of when you have something in your teeth and somebody points it out. That I would always feel in live interactions, like I was somehow doing something wrong or sticking out in a way that I wasn't aware of because of the way they would react. And that was the implicit stuff, but the explicit stuff was like, oh, we just hear it a different way, or we just envision this part a different way, or I've never heard it sung like that. I think maybe you should work with this and this coach on this particular repertoire. They're really good at this. And I'm like, what was wrong with that? What was wrong with it? Like, if you say this note in measure 5 is out of tune, flat or sharp. If you say this note in measure 56 is too short or too long. If you say even it sounds like you haven't quite figured out the registration for this particular line, you might need to work on this with your teacher. But it was never that. It was always these kind of sidelong remarks like, oh, it's cute that you have opinions about this kind of thing, but we're just here to work on the music, you know. And you're doing a piece like Don Giovanni or Carmen with like overt political and social references. Or even, I
Right.
mean, we're talking about Figaro by Mozart, overt political and social references. Like it's built into the score.
Huh. Yeah.
Class difference, right?
Yeah. So at what point were you like, were you connecting kind of all the background that you described, like how you grew up and the influences and role models you had around you,
Mm-hmm.
and like reconciling that with like this new opera world that you're in, and also your opinions and getting them out there? Like,
Yeah.
how did that evolve to what you do now, essentially, with your recital repertoire?
Right.
Because I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people fear, what
Mm.
happens if I share how I really
Oh yeah.
feel
Yeah.
publicly and online, and what could that do to my career? And I know in our previous conversation you were like,
Mm. Yeah.
oh, there's nothing to fear. Like, what it
There
did
isn't
was
anything.
it brought forth like a whole new possibility.
When I realized that it was possible to be racist, sexist, transphobic, all kinds of bigoted, and still have a great career, it was when I realized that, because like most serious opera people are aware of um, various divas with behavioral things that they got away with for years, various divos with, sexual harassment rap
Right.
sheets. Um, there are almost no great singers. Even if, I mean, forget instrumentalists and all that stuff and conductors, but like there are almost no great singers who are like icons in the opera world who didn't have some equally famous flaw,
Mm,
right?
mm-hmm.
Like the ones that are not known as having them are like, I don't know, like Leontine Price maybe would be one, and then like maybe one or two others. But like almost everybody who's like at that point where they're like one name stars, like
Pavarotti.
Callas. Yeah, Pavarotti, everybody who's in opera knows that he ran around on his wife consistently,
Yeah.
like constantly. Everybody now should know that, obviously Placido is in that one name category. Everybody by now should know
Yep.
what
Yep.
what he has done. Um, they're once I realized, like literally every new idol that I would learn about, also you learn about like, oh my God, they did this thing. Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And they allowed them like to like not be in jail, but to be on stage and to be
Yeah.
famous.
Yeah.
So then you realize that if the establishment doesn't have a problem with that, then even if people on lower levels of the opera establishment will say things like, oh, you need to be careful about this or that, what you realize is when you get to the top in terms of level of accomplishment, so not even level of glitz, right? Like that's a whole nother thing. But if you get to the top of what you are capable of in terms of accomplishment, people will effing hire you. And I changed it to effing at the last minute just to be safe. But like they will fucking hire you. You can edit
Uh-huh.
it out because I figured, you can edit it out if you
You
want
know
to. But
what?
like,
That's okay because I was gonna ask you. I was gonna talk about the fuck this moment. I
mm-hmm,
was gonna bring that
mm-hmm.
back because remember I
Well,
told you about that. That
oh
was
yeah.
kind of a thing that I would always ask my guests,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
you had a really good one.
Well,
So we'll
that
get to that story in a little bit. But
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, this was one of my fuck this moments, right? Because
Okay.
I realized, okay, wait, people will allow for any number of, and I was seeing this in my like in-person colleagues in Boston, especially in the early music scene. Like there were some people that, for whatever reasons, were often absolute turds to be around, and they got hired over and over and over. And finally, I was like, it's because they're solid in whatever they do.
Mm,
They might not be everybody's taste, but people know that they will handle their business when you hire them. Like you hire them, you know exactly what brand you're getting from them, and it's dependable and consistent.
right.
And then I realized I was like, it's not that you have to be dependably and consistently someone's fairy godmother singer. You just have to be dependable and consistent. Full stop.
And be
Whatever
yourself, and
whatever your thing is.
if you're capable, you'll still get
Mhm.
hired. Is that what you're
Absolutely.
saying? Okay.
Absolutely. And that was it kind of it came upon me the realization came upon me both in a flash and kind of gradually, because when I realized that even me with my all of my even I with all of my things that I thought that I needed to work on still and always will think that I need to work on, when I realized that I had managed to survive in a very very tough music field in a small town of Boston, small city, that I'd managed to survive and thrive for, oh man, it was like 5 or 6 years before I moved to New York. When I realized that, I was like, oh wait, bruh, you've been paying your bills and eating and clothing yourself from this. So whatever hurt people thought was going to come to your career, well, it obviously hadn't hurt enough.
Mm,
So it's like I knew that there was space for me because I also realized after the first few operatic things that I did in Boston that the audiences for those were turning out to be more tenuous and more scarce than the audiences that I was finding for the recital work.
ah,
And I
okay.
knew that, it was a fallacy that, if you were good at opera, you couldn't be good at recitals. I knew that if you are a solid singer, there is some recital work, there is some recital repertoire that you can do, even if you are, loud or whatever. And I always craved the kind of direct communication that opera, with its costumes and set design and directorial visions, rarely delivered. It delivers a grand spectacle thrill, but it rarely delivers that spotlight moment, the kind of moments that actually opera stars are known for come along very rarely in opera, because a lot of it is larger than life, and therefore you are a small part of that machine. So there is there is a love for that kind of spectacle, and because of the way that we teach singers, we kind of hold that kind of spectacle up as the pinnacle. But when I realized that it wasn't even the pinnacle in terms of how much you get paid, when I realized that concert work and recital work paid more any day of the week than opera contracts and took up less of your time, when I realized that none of the great operatic idols just did opera, that they all of them did concert work and recital work from the very beginning of their career to the end. Then I started to realize that the just opera all the time was kind of it was a fiction that then allowed a lot of young, passionate singers to just tamp down their authenticity and their passion. Because if you think that you should be making a living just doing grand opera from, 1700 to 1920,
Mm-hmm.
then you will do whatever the people that are in charge of the opera companies tell you have to do, including shut your mouth. If you realize that none of your favorite stars in opera just did opera, then you all of a sudden realize, okay, well, really, if they really are passionate about making me shut up, then at most I'm losing a fraction of my income rather than all of it, because no one makes all of it from opera.
And then the bonus is you get to be yourself and you get to say what you
That's the thing.
feel and think.
that's the thing. Yeah.
And I know from experience that when you do that,
Mm.
you find out who you are.
Oh yeah. You find out
And
who you are on the recital stage.
yeah, and even for me, not even on the recital stage, but in my business. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as long as when you get to be yourself and actually say it without fear about what
Yeah.
someone's going to say back,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually such a lot of like doors open up on a personal like growth level, and also probably like you're the walking proof that on a professional level it's true too. And in my case too, because growing a business, if you can say this is how it is, this is how I see it, I know this is true because this, people are attracted to that, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like people are much more attracted to that than someone who doesn't say anything.
Oh, and it also, you're like stepping into something really interesting now, because that is all, it's almost like practicing charisma, because charisma is or whatever word you use for it, but charisma is as good as any, is what makes people follow you.
Yep.
And care what you have to say or do, right? And unfortunately, people think, and we're taught, that something like charisma, similar to genius, is just an innate thing that you can't practice and develop. And that is the opposite of it. Like the ancient Greeks thought of genius, and even well into the 1600s in places like Europe and England, people thought that genius was something that visited you when you got good at inviting it, like creating the conditions for it to enter you. So it wasn't like a thing you were born with. Like your genius was like a genie that would visit you.
Oh, I love that. Do you think that's true for charisma too then?
Absolutely. Because you have to, you have to get good at creating the conditions to invite it, and then you work that muscle.
Oh,
and
I love
just
that.
like any other skill, or like meditation or any athletic skill, you get good at like getting into the zone on purpose.
That is so amazing.
And then you exercise that muscle until it is just second nature, until that comes to you or comes upon you every time you open your mouth, every time you get on stage, et cetera, right?
So did you see that open up? I mean, clearly you've got some natural charisma going on here, but like, but like, as you started to have these realizations, as you work through that fuck this moment, you're like, you know what, I can have a career where I'm saying what I want to say through not only social media and your audience online, but also that audience online translates to audience in real life, because other people follows are people, right? So like those people translate into audiences in your concert hall. And so like, how has your career evolved since you had this realization?
Yeah, so the operatic stuff went really well, but I realized, that these realizations were still happening. And so I kind of, and because it was Boston, I was involved in various concert work, doing oratorio work, both as members of ensembles and also, as soloists, and doing recitals occasionally, doing house concerts, doing things at the MFA and the Garden Museum. And because of that, I started to understand that I felt most natural when there were fewer things in between me, my voice, and the audience, right? So like the fewer things that were in the way. Like I understood that I could communicate and have an effect on the operatic stage. I understood that I could feel fulfilled as a member of an ensemble, you know, singing the B minor mass or something, you know, amazing. But that particular feeling of being plugged directly into the socket, of like mainlining like a really great drug with no bad side effects, you know, I wouldn't know anything about that, but that particular rush that you get when you are on stage, there's no music stand near you, there's no sheet music near you, the pianist is, you know, behind you and to your left or right, you are planted there, and it not only shows you if you know it, because if you're going to get on stage and do anything, much less Venturiza or, you know, a song, Mahler song cycle, uh, you will find out if you know it and if you have it right away, right? Like there is not, like there is nowhere to hide. You are naked, and if you don't like have it, if you haven't done enough study to know it, and if you don't feel it, the audience will just go away right away, like immediately. The first 5 or 6 minutes, they will be gone and you'll never get them back. And so I just loved that thrill, that the higher degree of difficulty of concert work, of recital work, just spoke to me, because I'm like, oh, this is like, I can drop 1,000 lines or 1,000 notes and rhythms on stage, and I can hide it by stepping behind a bit of scenery or, you know, acting, quote unquote, or something, you know. But I can't do anything like that on the recital stage. Like, you have to be completely, authentically, honestly present and ready. And that immediately took me back in my mind to how it felt growing up in the Black church. Because if you have a pastor or a music minister who are not on, then the experience falls flat. Like, you are found out immediately, because like the tradition in Black churches is not to read a sermon, so you have to be able to extemporaneously do it. And the tradition, obviously, for the music ministry and the music, not only the music minister but also the choir, is that you have to be ready to sing whenever the Spirit moves, without music, without sheet music, without rehearsal. You rehearse like your anthems and stuff, right? But you have to be ready to sing in a 3-part harmony that your music director throws at you by playing the notes on the piano right before you jump in.
Wow.
So if you have it, you have it. And if you don't, you will find out very quickly. You know, because it's like, I would sometimes see that with, you know, like white friends of mine who wanted to like visit my church, and they'd be like, oh, can I sit in the choir? I'm like, you can sit in, but I don't know if I think you'll find that it's not as simple as you think it is.
Did they try it?
Oh, of course they tried it. And, you know, every time it would come time for the choir to sing like a punctuation or an exclamation point in a sermon, they would be the ones who were singing with their mouths closed, as in not singing. But so that just resonated with me, because I realized that was the same level of preparation, right, between singing in a Black church, growing up singing in a Black church, and doing like Venturiza or, you know, Mahler or something. Just me, my pianist, my brain, my soul, whatever was there, my voice, whatever I had that day.
Yeah.
And when I realized that people go crazy over recitals in a different way than over grand theatrical productions, because if you do it right, you can move them personally, individually. So an opera audience, if you're lucky and if you're prepared and if you do a really good job, is often moved as a collective, right? Like, they are all drawn into the theatrical experience, so they all feel like they're a part of it, but they do not feel like you're singing or acting or talking directly to them individually.
Okay.
And this is just from talking to audience members, right? Like when you hear somebody describe their experience of either going to their first opera, or if they're an avid opera goer, describing their latest favorite opera experience, they're like, oh, when they did this thing, that particular cadenza was unbelievable, and she was an incredible voice that night. And oh, when the orchestra swelled at the end of the overture, it just, we were all of our breath, was taken away. It took my breath away. But they hardly ever say, this one moment reminded me of this thing in my life.
Mm.
This one moment happened, and I found myself crying because I remembered my grandfather dying. It's not better or worse. It's just different. It's a much more collective,
Right.
grand scale moving of the house, as opposed to in a recital when it's done well. People will leave saying, I don't even speak German, but that 11th song, I thought they were singing right to me. It made me think of this thing that happened a week ago in my own life. I don't know why that is. I don't know what they were singing about. I mean, I looked at the program and I guess I understand, but when they were singing it in the moment, it made me
That's
feel like
cool.
this. And
That's
so,
cool.
yeah, that right there, I don't care overly much what people think about what I think or say in terms of whether they agree with it or not. But I do care about people. I like I think my party line is I like people on a case by case basis, but they can also piss me off on a case by case basis. But if they are in a collective, I view them as my congregation, and it's my job to minister to them, right? So like even if a person I categorically dislike is in one of my audiences, I care about them as part of the audience in that moment. And
Right.
so I want to give them an experience that'll make them feel something intensely and feel fulfilled at the end of the night. And so knowing that recitals can do that if you do it right, that was all that I needed. Besides like the fact that you get paid a lump sum and you don't have to show up to umpteen million rehearsals for staging and all that stuff. But
Right.
that
So
was the
like,
thing.
so to talk about that for a second, because like, so you had this realization, you realized like this was really where you wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, it sounds like the activism part played a role in this a little bit.
Oh
I
yes.
mean,
Oh yeah.
how did it actually? How did it play a role? Like if you're saying,
So yeah.
if you're out there saying like things about equality in our in the opera field and
Mm-hmm.
just pointing out things that you feel really strongly about,
Mm.
how did it play a role in your career?
I realized that the reason that there weren't more faces that looked like mine on stage was not because we, as in Black people, weren't interested. It was
Mm,
because there was something in the pipeline that was weeding us out. And like I wasn't like a complete idiot. I was like, well, it's probably racism, but like but like the step by step
okay.
parts, the links of it, I wasn't as aware of until I
Okay.
realized that all of the implicit and explicit things that I was hearing in rehearsal or during my training, every single other Black musician was hearing. And so it was just chopping down our self esteem and weeding us out before we would
Okay.
get to
Okay.
uh, audition for conservatory, before we would go for our masters, before we would go for our performance diploma, before we would get to the point even when we were hopefully auditioning for major houses or trying to get management or trying to book recitals, that like spirits were being crushed before they got a chance to even try. And so I am a naturally, I mean, my mother, God bless her, knows this very well. We are very much alike in a lot of ways, but my apple fell a little bit far from her tree, or maybe fell and rolled because she's very genteel and I am not. And I'm really very resistant to being told that I cannot do something for no good reason and that I shouldn't, right? Like I I had a very strong visceral adverse reaction to realizing that there were scores of incredibly talented, incredibly gifted, and incredibly hardworking and well trained Black singers and musicians that were being given the brush off. And because they were nicer than me or didn't have the various privileges, educational privileges that I grew up with, they were stopping and going and doing something else.
Mhm.
And so that was why I was ending up on stage alone. Like one of the operas I was in was a little known opera by Rimsky-Korsakov named Snegorochka, the Snow Maiden. And I was, I was the one of the cast's main male lead, and I was the only black singer on stage, just the only one in either
Mhm.
cast. And I was just like, okay, this opera has a cast of like 18 to 22 characters.
Yeah.
And I know amazing black singers in every voice type that either didn't audition because they thought it was not going to work out, like it was a waste of time to audition because they wouldn't get chosen, or auditioned the same day as me. And all of a sudden, we get to the first rehearsal and I look around and I'm like, where'd they all go?
Wow.
And I'm dealing with colleagues on stage who are not as good. Like I know they're not as good as the singers that I wasn't seeing because I'd worked, we all worked, with each other. Like, this, there were no secrets about whose voice could do this and such thing and who could sing and move and act. Like, it's a very small world. And so I just I got pissed off. I was like, you know what? This ain't right. This is not the meritocracy, just authentic, universal language of music that I was raised believing in. Like that's not whatever it is, this ain't it. And so I realized that I couldn't speak directly about these things while sticking to singing Rimsky-Korsakov, Mozart, Bach, and Brahms. I mean, I still love to do that, and I still do it when when I'm offered something that's good, especially operatic. I think my next operatic project coming up is going to be some like very obscure French Baroque opera, which is going to be amazingly fun. But that was when I realized that I had to start making more of a pointed, conveying more of a pointed message with my repertoire and with
Mhm.
what I talked about. And I knew that since I'd had my first taste of recitals, I was like, this is the format where I can get across the most and still do amazing repertoire. Like it was
Okay.
kind of a natural fit for that.
Awesome. And so like so did the design and the the repertoire and all that you're realizing is clearly evolving what you're choosing to do because probably feels much better to be the voice completely like in terms of repertoire, in terms of just control over the whole
Oh yeah,
performance situation.
yeah.
Did all of that help to attract presenters to you, as far as, or how did next steps fall into place with that?
Right. So that was exactly how it kind of came to pass. And it was weird because it kind of did a circular feedback thing into the concert solo work and the operatic work as well. But having the fact that I had a clear idea
Mhm.
of what I wanted the message of each one of my programs. When we started out, I think I had like three different programs. Oh Glory was one, Venturiza was another, and then we did like I think Brahms, four serious songs, and some Mahler on the last one. And like all of those programs, including Oh Glory, even though Oh Glory has a lot of different kinds of repertoire, all of those programs have like straight down the middle German leader on them,
Mhm.
right? So like, but I knew that and I realized this when, kind of pitching these recitals to various venues and presenters, if I had a very clear idea, not only of what the recital was about, that came through not only because, somebody saw the literal line of pieces and saw, oh, there's a theme here, there's a theme here, not just because they read my program notes, but also because I had a good lean paragraph that I could stick into any email that I sent to anybody or tell them, in person, that showed exactly what the program was about. Then like I had
the elevator pitch came easily to me because I'd spent all that time living with the repertoire. So like, just like my friend Christopher in his program, like you can talk about it if you've like lived it for a
Right.
while. But because I had a clear idea of what each program was about, even the program that was just Venturizer, you know, people, well, they're like, well, I like Venturizer, but why is anybody going to come hear Venturizer? And I'm like, well, because the concept that I have for doing Venturizer is clear and distinct from the concept that anybody else has when they're doing Venturizer, because usually their concept is, I love Venturizer. Like, and that doesn't work, right? The concept that I had of Venturizer was that it was, and like you and I talked about this a little bit before, but the concept that I had that got us our first few performances of it was that it was a breakup album told as breakup albums usually are from only one side of the breakup.
Mm.
And so the guy is constructing, he's part of the reason he's so tortured in all of the songs, or most of the songs, is because he thought that the relationship that they would have had would have been amazing. But
Yeah.
it's entirely his own fabrication, but it's what he tortures himself with. It's like, oh, this amazing, shining, beautiful thing that we could have had but didn't have because of XYZ. But you never hear from her.
You never hear from her. And also you mentioned, that the idea is that she is an object that
Oh
he's
yeah.
trying to obtain, right? Not like, yeah.
Every time he mentions her, he, first of all, we never get her name. I mean, duh, of course not. And we get descriptions of, her eyes or her hands or her hair, but never does it coalesce into a person. Like we
Interesting.
don't we don't hear the closest thing, taking Venturizer as an example, but really it's like all of German romantic song rep, which is of course the core of what people are usually taught to sing as recitalists. Um, it's always, I think the closest we ever get to any kind of personality from her comes in the first song, Gute Nacht, where he says, Das Mädchen sprach von Liebe, die Mutter gar von which is the maiden. And I love how he calls her the maiden. He doesn't find a way to say her name in the syllables that he could have used with the girl, the maiden. The maiden spoke of love. The mother spoke of marriage. And the implication is, the mother looked at that and said, that's not going to be an advantageous match for my daughter. But that is the closest thing we get to any actual expression from the maiden.
So how do you bring, like, this is so, I think this is interesting. And do you set it up? Do you tell that story, or are you like, what's the point of view?
So
How are
yeah,
you connecting this to like either getting the concert or
yeah.
actually in the concert talking about this music?
So I tell, and I made it clear to the presenters, I'm like, this is the way I see it. And if you let me, if you help me advertise it like you would advertise like a classic singer-songwriter, Joni Mitchell, Alanis Morissette, Jewel kind of concert. Everything from the aesthetic of the posters or the online
Oh, cool.
advertising to the material, either video or audio, probably both, that I provide you. If you go with me on this concept, it bleeds into how we advertise it. And I guarantee you, because I had under my belt already one performance, that like we were given full, like almost full control over how it was advertised.
Okay.
And we had a completely full house that was like standing up and screaming at the end of it. And we
Marketing.
yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and we were lucky enough because one of the reasons we love this particular venue, it's a little piano museum out in like Ashburnham, Massachusetts, somewhere out in Western Mass. And their shtick is doing repertoire on the pianos or the keyboard instruments that were being used at the time of composition.
Okay.
So it's usually a very like old white crowd, right? Like very upper
Yeah.
crowd. But we came in and they don't get up for anyone, right? Like they come into the venue, they hear someone play repertoire on the instruments that it was composed on or premiered on, and they go, "Oh yes, very nice, very nice. Yes. Mm. What's on the docket for next week's program? Oh yes." We went in there and did Venturiza, and my pianist was playing on a period, forte piano. We went in there and did Venturiza, and it was like people were entranced. They were crying. They were like forgetting to breathe. At the end of it, we finished, and on the video and on the audio CD of the concert, there was silence for like a minute, and and we were just like, and we were like in the moment, like we were in the mood of the last song, and then they lost their ever loving minds. People were coming up to us saying things like, "I've heard Venturiza 1,000 times. I've never heard it like that." And it's because that particular presenter gave us the kind of control I was talking about in terms of how we advertised it, the audiovisual parts of it that we advertised on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. They let me like do a little like 2-minute, 1.5-minute video where we would like do the first few measures from like 4 of strategically chosen songs from Venturiza, and then I would say what pop song it reminded me of.
Oh, that's
like,
cool.
This reminds me of a Toni Morrison song. This reminds me of this song, and then like people know this music, so they'd be like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." And like obviously in the description, I would put like a link to a YouTube video of that song.
Yeah, or even with the title of it, like that's kind of like the idea of clickbait. Like, want to hear some, whatever century.
And so like when you get that point across that like these songs are the same as other songs that are not intimidating.
Yes, you're bringing it into what's going on today and connecting it to people for people so they can connect and have a relationship with that. But what I love about what you're describing is that where it starts is who you're being. Generally. Mm-hmm. And like this is what I talk about too when I help people with audience building, is that it's like that it's about who you're being. It's not just about like what you can say to somebody to make them like your concert or want to go to it, but it's about who you are and who you're being all the time.
Yes.
And like that's what you're showing here, is that you care so much about what you're doing in a different way and how it gets across to people, that you have the wherewithal to say, well, then we have to talk about how this is going to be marketed and how it's going to be presented online and in the posters and on your website and everything else, because it's like rooted in how you believe that it gets across to people. Rooted in creating a relationship with it, as opposed to just saying you should like this is here because I like it. I'm going to sing this because I like it. That's the reason I like it, and you should like it too. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people, I get it. They love classical music and they want more people to love it too. But the good enough reason is not, you should like this because I like it.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it we would not have presented it. My pianist at the time is a good buddy of mine. We would not have presented it if it was only that we liked it.
Yeah.
But we loved it so much, and we thought, because of this angle that we had about it, that it would also draw other people in.
Yeah.
So those two things, right? Because like we actually became friends over sight reading through Venturiza. Like that was literally what we did the first time we met.
That's cool.
So we'd been doing Venturiza for forever anyway, but we had done other performances first of other repertoire, and we got to the point where we're like, well, I feel like we have not only a handle on it musically, but I feel like we have a way to spin it to other people that will make them as excited about it as we are, and therefore, if we can get that vision to be trusted once by a presenter, which we were fortunate enough to do, then we'll have all the material that we need, because we're going to like video it from as many angles as we can. We're going to get an audio recording. We're going to get pictures taken, so you can like if you're sending it to a presenter and you can show them a picture of an audience member with literally, there's one which is my favorite picture, and we asked permission from this audience member, but she had her like, I gave them very, very slender notes. I gave them my translations, which were very modern English style of the songs. Mm-hmm. And I said something about the story that we were envisioning before the very first song and didn't talk for the rest of the thing, which is unusual for me, but because it was a cycle, we went straight through. But we got this picture of her and she had her like little sheet of paper in her lap and her mouth was ever so slightly open and she just looked stunned. She was just like, she was rapt, right? So we could send, after that, I could send to a presenter, not only, here's my program, here's my bio, this is where I've sung before, I always manage not to fall on my face when I sing in public, like all but I could also send them pictures of the audience, like wide to show how packed the place was, but also close-up shots of various people looking like they'd been like filleted while we're performing.
That's so great. And James, you know, I have to tell you, for the next time you get into a situation that's a live concert, I have wanted someone to copy this idea for so long. One of my favorite interviews I ever did was with this guy named Murray Hidary, who has this concert, which is like a meditative experience. He improvises piano music. And he basically developed his own language of music based on melody and harmony from Eastern traditions and stuff. And the intention of the concert is to have a meditative experience. He calls it mind travel. So so the whole entire concert is improvised, and they usually take place in a beautiful setting like the beach, and people listen to it with Bluetooth headsets and stuff like that. So when he was just getting started, he did this as a house concert, and then he had somebody with a video camera there, and as people were leaving that really incredible experience, like just moments after it was over, he did not him, like the camera person went up to people and said, like, he was asking them, or whoever it was, what was your experience like? And getting like these little clips of people right after they had that experience and what that was like to experience, and then made like a promotional, like super rough cut kind of video like that. But like to capture what someone feels in the moment of their excitement about something, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
You did that with photos. It would be cool to like emulate what Murray did and do that after a concert sometime.
You know, I thank you for that idea, because I'm gonna relay that to the person who's kind of managing the Zoom meeting that I'm doing the concert on Saturday.
Yeah.
We're obviously they're obviously going to mute everybody but me during the show, but then like unmute everybody at the end so they can, you know, communicate with me if they want to. But I will also ask them to like ask people if it's okay to like take shots of the screen, because like that right there is not only the reason we do all this, right? Like music is not just an edifice that we construct out of sound. It is to elicit emotion and to communicate emotion, but also people are, especially when advertising anything that involves people leaving their homes, much less tuning in on the computer, you know, when you have so many other options, if they know that somebody else enjoys it, that is the reason for them to also see if they enjoy it.
100%. Social proof. It's all about social proof.
Oh yeah.
If someone says, oh my God, I heard James Dargan in a small theater in Massachusetts, and I normally hear like, you know, the run-of-the-mill piano recitals, but this time
I don't know what it was, but it was fun.
Yeah, and I heard the most amazing, like I'd never heard it like that before. I mean, that's gonna make somebody go, oh, I need to find out who this is, you know, because it's another person who had a really great experience. It's the best kind of advertising possible. So like, so if you could even get like on that Zoom concert call, if you could get people to say, because if you start unmuting, like maybe the question is, what was that like for you? And just get people, because then you could splice that out and use it.
Yeah,
but,
I'm absolutely going to ask him that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So if I don't say so myself.
Oh, that's great.
If I don't copy it from other people. But like, So tell us about, so what's happening? It's coming up. Is
Mhm.
this free to the is this open to the public? Maybe not free, but is it open to the
Oh,
public and
it's
people?
it's open to the public and actually completely free.
Oh, wow.
The only reason that they are having people RSVP for free tickets is to get some idea of like viewership, because this is the
Right.
first time that this company is doing it, and they've gotten grants from a couple of Boston organizations so that they can show kind of proof of progress. But yeah, it's totally free and open to the public. I'm definitely going to post it on all of my keep posting on all of my channels and all of
When is the date?
Saturday, May 16th, so this Saturday at
Okay.
6 p.m. And it's going to be like a tight hour, and it's going to be spirituals, um, poetry by Black poets, solo violin Bach, and like it's basically the whole program came up around the idea of Nina Simone's song "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free." And I don't know if you do you know that song?
No.
So I don't have my hold on. I'm going to quickly just plug in my external mic because I don't want to blow your audio in a bad way.
Are you gonna sing?
Yeah, yeah. Because it's just as most of her work this is an amazing song. This is one of the many songs that Nina Simone wrote, and of course she's a huge role model of mine because she. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is the first verse of "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free." I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all these chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things I want to say. Say it loud, say it clear, for the whole wide world to hear. Say it loud, say it clear, for the whole wide world to hear. Now she does this a little bit differently, obviously, because she could do whatever she wanted as a pianist and a
That's
singer.
amazing. That sounded so good.
I appreciate it. It's a song that it's hard to classify, as with most of her work. She called her songs black classical music,
Mm.
but it almost registers for me as a spiritual because it's got that kind of simplistic, repetitive musical line, and there's a lot of parallelism in the poetry and the lyrics, but the feeling, and there's like 5 or 6 verses, organized in a similar way to that one, but the feeling it conveys is so strong and clear. And I found myself thinking about not just that first line, but the whole spirit of the song is basically, I wish that all of these lies that society set up to break us apart were not here. You know, um, there's another verse that says, if you knew what I knew, you would agree that all men should be free. Right. So, the whole song conveys this feeling of not only earthiness and solidity and conviction, but also it is about being free from all of the things that hold us down. And when I was asked to put a program together for this particular time in the world right now, I thought, most of what we're feeling is trapped.
Mhm.
And so when it became clear to me that I was going to organize it around that song, then all of the other repertoire kind of coalesced around that kind of central motif of that particular song. So all of the repertoire uh, that I'm doing, the Bach, the spirituals, the poetry readings, all of it in some way has to do with either wanting to be free or how it feels to be free. And so the concert is called Time to Be Free. Um, but yeah, it's gonna be really fun. I mean, there's Nature Boy, the song Nature Boy is in there. Balm and Gilead, Steal Away are spirituals that are in there. There's poetry by Toni Morrison. There's poetry by Langston Hughes. Poetry by Lucille Clifton. There's a poem of mine in there. And
Cool.
I see it as kind of a free-flowing kind of hour where I can just invite people into my space and into my headspace.
That's
And
amazing. Okay, well, you know what? Now that I know this is on Saturday
oh
and
yeah,
it's Thursday, that means I
yeah,
gotta get this
oh yeah,
episode out on Friday.
yeah,
So that's a quick turnaround.
yeah,
So I'm not even gonna, like, I'm just gonna not edit. This
yeah,
is the raw
yeah.
conversation that I had with you today. So
I love it.
I love this so much. Okay, I want people to find out about this. So I'm gonna share, like, not only am I gonna launch this episode, but I'll
Mhm.
share like your posts about it onto
Yeah.
Crushing Classical Facebook page.
Oh,
And I think
lovely.
what I would like to invite people listening um we're gonna do a Facebook Live about,
Yes.
like, to talk about basically what we're talking about here today, which is,
Mm-hmm.
to break it down,
Mm-hmm.
being yourself, letting yourself say what you want to say and what you feel passionate and strongly about,
Yes.
and how that translates to growing the audience, not only growing your audience online, growing your audience in person, but what that does for your career
Mm-hmm.
and what it
Mm-hmm.
does for you as a person, and
Yeah.
how that evolves your career as well. It's like so many
Yeah.
different levels,
Well, because just from a commercial standpoint, which is what people are often worried about, right?
Yeah.
This kind of focusing on who you are and having that be the driving force for your particular focus in terms of performance or speaking or workshopping or whatever, that means that the offers that you start to field are things that you actually want to say yes to instead
Yes.
of being like, oh, I need the money, so I'll take what's there.
Yes.
I'll audition for whatever is there and I'll take whatever and do whatever is there versus what we want, which is people coming to you with offers for things that you want to do.
Yes. But you have to be an active role in the
Oh,
people
yeah.
coming to you, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because they have to know what you do so they can
Yes.
come to you.
And
But
staying quiet and not talking about it
oh man,
online is not going to
it's
get
it's death.
your
Or really
stuff out there.
anywhere. Like,
Yeah.
political stands are not, I hope that nobody really believes nowadays that it is possible to be completely apolitical. Because it's not. Like every decision you make, if you were in the public eye, conveys a political stance.
Yeah. And, I think regardless of what people want to say out there, like what you just said, like
Mm-hmm.
taking a stand on anything is going to help you have resolve in who you are
Yes.
just as a person.
Yes, absolutely. It's
So
flexing that muscle, that
that
charisma
muscle, yeah. And
Yeah.
also like that muscle you talked about, the charisma muscle, like that is such
Mm-hmm.
a great way to talk about it. I just love it so much. So
Yeah.
like we're gonna go live on Facebook on Friday, May 22nd at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So I'll
Absolutely.
talk about that too and post about it.
Yeah.
But between now and then, what advice, like if you could give like a quick punchy piece of
Mm-hmm.
advice to musicians out there who feel shy about like
Mm.
being somewhat of an activist, or even
Yes.
even if it's way less than that, maybe it's not even
Yeah.
activism in any way, but
Yeah.
maybe it's just talking about their art and
Yes.
proclaiming that, like, hey, I'm good at this thing, I
Yes.
really am, because
Yes.
I mean, like, activism, forget about activism,
Yeah.
like that's important for a lot of people, but a lot of people are still at the place of, can I even say that I'm good at this thing?
Yeah. Or even that I like this thing.
Yes.
That is the thing where like having the courage to say that you like something versus, oh, I love all of my classical music darlings equally. That is like the closest to an quote unquote apolitical classical
Yeah,
music
exactly.
and right? Like, oh, I love whatever I'm being paid to do, blah 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 blah.
Yep.
Okay, first of all, that doesn't get you hired any more than saying my favorite composer is Meyerbeer. Hey, Meyerbeer Club. but like it's not.
Look at that
whatever.
full circle.
It's-
Look at how you brought it back.
I know, right? Just bring it back around,
Yeah.
He's not my favorite composer, but whatever. But like that saying that my favorite composer is Meyerbeer is not going to make somebody not hire me. It's actually going to make them think that I care passionately about what I do. So it's going to make them more likely to hire me, even if they're not hiring me to do Meyerbeer, right?
Essentially, go put yourself out on a limb a little bit. Just see what happens. A lot of times what I've learned is when you feel like you're going way out on a limb, the people who are reading it are going mostly, oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Because the thing is that nothing we do as musicians, especially in like the canon as it is received, which is problematic in itself, but the canon is not seen as controversial now. Like our classical music canon is not seen as controversial. It used to be like cutting edge, right?
Yeah.
But it's not anymore. It's seen as safe. So audiences, even if you aren't doing activism is at its root being honest about what you like and dislike. Like, I dislike racism. I like equality. It also is the same continuum when I say I prefer these songs by Brahms to these songs by Beethoven. They're taking a stand on something.
Right.
And that's what people want. And,
yes.
And when people are looking for people to hire or even coming to you with offers for things, when they're coming to you with money involved, they want to know that you have a stance, because a stance draws people in, even if they disagree with it. If I'm doing a recital, again, Meyerbeer is my favorite talking horse today. If I'm doing a recital, all of Meyerbeer, and he wrote songs in 3 different languages, so there's ample material. If I'm doing a recital, all of Meyerbeer, I'm going to get at least 5 people in the audience who come precisely because they don't like Meyerbeer and they want to see me prove them wrong.
Yeah.
I've literally had people come up to me after recitals and be like, I usually find Schubert Lieder very boring, but I didn't this time. And I'm like, cool, good talk. But also, they paid money and I got the money. So, it's like even I've had people come precisely because they're like, oh, I thought it was going to be boring. And I'm like, you came anyway. Interesting.
I love that. That's great advice. And I think people will hopefully come to the Q&A and ask more about that, because you have a lot of experience with that now. Yeah. Putting yourself out there. And I think it's really inspiring. And everyone listening, check out James. Of course, I'll link you in the show notes, but also share on my Crushing Classical page, because time crunch. I got to press stop so I can start putting this out there.
I don't really apologize for springing it on you. It definitely, the offer to do the concert sprang upon me. So
that's cool. Well, I'm not going to be perfectionistic about this. Like my daughter just barged in a second ago. She didn't know I was recording.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, you guys are going to have to hear that. This is the reality of everyone in the house staying at home, right?
This is our lives. Here's our lives right now.
Yeah. So thank you so much, James. I really enjoyed this conversation. I enjoyed our off-the-record conversation, and we're going to have a great talk on Facebook Live next week. So thank you so much. I'm Tracy Friedlander, and you've been listening to the Crushing Classical podcast. You can follow Crushing Classical on Instagram and Facebook at Crushing Classical. If you haven't yet, you can go to Apple Podcast and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Your reviews help others to find these conversations. Thanks for listening.